You're tuned in to the HR Bandit podcast, your one-way ticket to the latest and craziest in the world of work. In partnership with Timber Media, Podcaster for India Inc. is sponsored by Adrenaline E-Systems Limited.
Hey, welcome to HR Bandit. This is your host Ankita, and I'm so glad to welcome you to what can only be referred to as our best one yet. If this is you returning, a big hug to you, and if this is your first time here, I'm so glad you found us. Now, June is my favorite month of the year, and as we get closer to the second half of the year, I hope you've taken a moment to pause, reflect, take a little break. I know I've just returned from a short break, and I can't tell you how much it's done for my inspiration and energy levels. But this isn't a pod about my break, so we're going to jump straight into our top 3 stories for the day. First up, the 2023 Work Trends Report by Microsoft is now out. While we can't cover everything that's in the report, we will discuss our top picks. For our second story, slightly related to the first, work now has a PR problem. As months stack on, work continues to get a bad rap despite workers apparently being more happier at work than ever before. For a third and final story, it's a sin to record an episode during Pride Month and not talk about how to be a good ally. But bandits, as always, the best part of our show is the guest for today. I'm so pleased to introduce you to Kevin Empey. Kevin is the founder and managing director of Work Matters, an international future of work consulting and training firm set up in 2017 to help business leaders, HR practitioners navigate the future of work. He's the author of Thrive in the Future of Work and a regular commentator and writer on the future of work trends and the implications for organizations and their people. A former partner of Willis Towers Watson, Kevin is also the director of the Senior Leadership Program in the Irish Management Institute. He was named on the HR Most Influential Thinkers list in 2022 and has received several national and international awards for his contribution to the future of work research, also social entrepreneurship and employment and labor policy. He served as a member of the Irish government's Labour Market Council and was the founder of WorkLink, an internationally recognized not-for-profit coaching and mentoring organization set up to help unemployed job seekers into full-time employment. Wow, that was quite a mouthful, Kevin. Welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. And thank you for having me along. That was a mouthful. And thank you for even trying. My goodness.
But it goes to show how much. And I'd love to know later, maybe more about the not-for-profit that's there. That sounds really fascinating and something you probably need a lot in the industry.
Sure, yeah. No, I suppose I've always been curious about the world of work generally from different points of view, not just from the workplace and all the things we're going to discuss today, but also about, where work is going and what good work looks like. And, from a wider societal point of view, are we doing the right things, making the right choices in terms of work and work policy, etc. So that's brought me down a few interesting avenues, all right.
I'm sure. Well, we have a very interesting lineup today, and I can't wait to get to it. But before we jump into it, we're getting close to the mid-year mark. Kevin, how are you doing against your goals? Or did you even set any?
I know you've really caught me out here. I'm on this kind of a question. I'm reminded of my reports that you'd get from your teachers, at the end of the year to say, satisfactory work in progress. But maybe, I remember there was always one with being damned with faint praise, the way they might say something like, has the potential to do much better, if he applied himself more consistently. So that kind of idea of, making progress, but, could do better sort of rings in my ears. But to be fair, I've got this wonderful team in Work Matters, and, it is hard these days actually to set very, very, particularly in our field, to set very sort of rigid targets, and they tend to emerge and develop as we go. But we have broad sort of areas that we would like to progress in, and sometimes we beat them, sometimes we don't, sometimes we learn along the way and adjust. There was two kind of targets, or two areas that we did have a feel were going to evolve and develop in 2023. And one was in dealing with all the sort of complexities and the range of issues that we'll be talking about today. We've really felt for a long time that peer-to-peer discussion on those, creating a forum for having proper peer-to-peer learning and helping each other, having clients advise each other about, these tricky topics in a supportive environment was really important. And so we created a portal around that, and that has taken off really, really well. And that idea of peer-to-peer support and community in the dealing with future of work issues. So we're really, really happy to see that progress. And another area I guess we thought might happen was that everybody's so busy right now, but still so much more enablement and training and support needed around, transitioning to hybrid work models and so on. There's a sort of dichotomy there, because on the one hand, there's the need for support, but on the other hand, there's a lack of capacity to give time to this area, on top of everything else going on. So the little micro learning things that we've been doing, little digital training courses and so on, and just very, very flexible range of support initiatives and items that people can fit into what they're already doing. That's another area that we just thought was probably likely to emerge as important, and that seems to be going well as well. So we won't beat ourselves up too much. Things are very interesting and going well, thanks.
Not bad. So you're definitely on the right track. So even if you don't get anything done in the second half of the year, I'm guessing we're good. Well, I'm going to jump straight into our first topic of the day. We're going to park how I'm doing on my goals for maybe the end of the pod. So
you're doing great, judging by this podcast anyway. My goodness.
Thank you. I would like to think so too, but I'm going to keep it a surprise. I'll give a percentage approximate of how much I've hit, maybe. Okay. So Microsoft's yearly work trends report is now out. Now the report in itself is immensely interesting and would take at least a few episodes if we were to cover it end to end. Bandits, per always, everything we talk about today will be linked in the show notes below. But Kevin, are you ready? Give us your top pick from the report this year.
My goodness, and I agree, and I'm glad you've dipped into this report. I think compliments to Microsoft, who have been trying to keep their fingers on the pulse of all these changes in the last number of years now. I take this from this, Ankita, some mixed news. I feel like in these surveys, we're trying to hit a moving target. Things are moving so fast. It's so hard to sort of keep up with. And you almost, by the time you've kind of maybe checked in with people on something else has happened in probably the previous weeks or months, and it's almost not out of date, but it's really kind of, there's real mixed news, isn't there? There's quite a lot of contradiction and paradox in there. On the one hand, there seems to be some good news around people being happier and work-life balance maybe, beginning to settle. But on the other hand, like motivation down, burnout up, productivity a problem. I know areas that you'll be interested in around that whole digital working area, etc. Likelihood for moving on up to 56% versus 38% in 2022. So it's funny. It's like some people are reporting good news, but also some concern. But if I had to pick one, I think, and it probably captures a number of them, but there's quite an emphasis on culture in this one. This is in the Work Trends report on the Irish version anyway, was there's concern around culture and employees really putting that as their top ask for employers to get right. I think they've, moved that ask up from, it was 59% priority to them last year, but it was gone up to number one priority for employers to get right on, as according to employees, from 59% to 67%. And I think that's there's a sort of an appeal for to get culture right, isn't there? And
we didn't get it right last year. So asking
it's
again.
It's hard. I mean, I do think we'll probably come to this later, but I do think we're still going through a period of flux, in terms of the world of work. Now it's always in a state of flux. It's a moving thing. So it's always been that case. But I think the period we're going through right now is particularly a period of flux. We had our pre-COVID ways of working, so be it, whatever they were. We had our COVID experience, and I think this post-COVID phase we're going in, it isn't like a light switch, that it is suddenly turned on for us to be able to be settled in new ways of working. So I'm not surprised, I guess, that there's this kind of flux going on, a transition, and these kind of mixed messages. But underlying for me, I picked up this idea of culture. Like, could you help make my work better? My work experience, could I feel more positive and good about how I get my work done and what it feels to work around here? That seems to be an underlying trend coming out of the research.
And
work
I'm not
to do
surprised. I think, if you could say, if there were three types of ears, there are ears of growth, there are ears of experimentation, and then, as Mark Zuckerberg calls it, the ear of optimization. And there's no doubt on which ear we are currently in. And it's only natural that you won't have the same kind of excitement as comes with growth and experimentation. There is obviously optimization also means you're trying to now sit back and figure out, what does my culture look like, right? For example, the basic things everyone's revolting against is do I come into office? Do I not come into office? Make up your mind. You've had 3 years to say something. And now that organizations have said something, people obviously don't like it. So I do think it's only natural that the whole clamor for figuring out what culture is and that it aligns with what employees believe it should be is it's natural, and I loved it that it was called out in that report.
Because we're really shaping a new culture now, aren't we? So that's part of this flux point that when I've been involved in so many of culture definition and exercises over the years, and often what happens in those sort of culture reviews is that you're trying to capture where our culture is today based on a sort of a steady experience of 3 to 5 years or whatever, and you're trying to create a sense of where is it now and where do we want it to go in the future. But at the moment, we seem to be building culture on the go, right? Because, we're entering kind of a new phase of work and working life. We're trying to figure out, well, what type of culture do we want? And is that aligned critically? Is that aligned with what the business needs as well? And sometimes there's a little bit of contradiction there because expectations amongst employees are through the roof now in terms of the type of work culture that they want. Employers are maybe feeling actually there are some other things we need to get right as well, and so there's this kind of tension but I think a huge opportunity, because I think culture and things like values have often had a rough time, or they haven't been very well executed in the past. I think we all have had experience of that, and how really authentic are they? How real are they? How usable are they really, values to be able to make decisions? I think there's a massive opportunity now to really be really honest and open about what culture means for us. And when it comes to values, what are they and how useful are they on a day-to-day basis for us to make decisions and to have difficult conversations with each other, or so look, it's in flux, it's tricky, not everybody's reporting positively, but I think it is a time of great opportunity now as well, and we shouldn't just rush into prescribed kind of cultural blueprints just because somebody else is maybe doing something, or we're distracted by what our competitors are doing.
I love that. And I'm going to try and tie it into my pick from the report. And mine is, of course, from the AI report of the work trends thing. But it is also about, if I spend all day just swatting emails and in meetings, how much time do I actually have to sit back and think about what the culture of my organization should be? So here's my pick. I love that the report has a section dedicated to AI. A few numbers. Microsoft surveyed 31,000 people in 31 countries. That was very well numbered, and analyzed trillions of Microsoft 365 productivity signals along with labor trends from the LinkedIn economic graph that has led to what Microsoft now calls three urgent insights. Now, my standout insight of the three is the one on digital debt, that the inflow of
Yeah.
data, emails, meetings, and notifications have outpaced humans' ability to process it all. The report says that nearly 2 in 3 people, almost 64%, say that they struggle with having the time and energy to do their job. And those people are 3.5 times more likely to also struggle with innovation and strategic thinking. And nearly 2 in 3 leaders, 60%, are already feeling the effects, saying that there's a lack of innovation or breakthrough ideas, and that is a concern. Now, there are two reasons this stood out for me. One, well, it resonates deeply because, like I just said, I spend a little too much time with emails and meetings, and that's not my job. Like, my job is not transactional work. It's supposedly designed to be more strategic, and open field thinking. But that is exactly what turns my 8-hour day into a 10 plus hour day, because I'm supposed to not let any email stagnate for too long, still be in God knows how many meetings, but also then be able to sit back and say, are we headed in the right direction? Should we still be calling employees back into the office? What does that look like? So I really understand the impact of just the digital debt on innovation and deeply resonate with it. And I'm sure most people do. The second point why I love this particular insight is because it goes into depth on meetings, right? It specifically talks about how meetings are digital artifacts and should be treated as such, right? And they mentioned meeting transcripts at one point, right? And I was like, that's it. That is exactly what I need. I don't need meeting notes because that's open to interpretation, captures whatever the note taker thinks is most important, doesn't give me an insight into the conversation that was happening in the room. And then the meeting recordings, which just take up so much time to sit through it, like even if at 1.5x. Meeting transcripts, on the other hand, would probably take 5 to 7 minutes to read. I'll know exactly how it was going back and forth. AI can help with just that. So I do think AI is a friend, allows us to get more done. And the sooner we learn how to make the most of it, the better. What do you think?
No, I think you're onto something there. And I think there is overlap, by the way. I think there's great overlap because that cultural kind of cry out for better culture, for me, and you look at some of the detail underneath that, is the cry out for just make my work better, make my work easier. And there was also concern, I think, in the information about, I've got less time for personal work, for deep work. I've got all this distraction and meetings and so on. So the digital debt is really a critical part now of culture because it influences or even controls so much of our daily work, right? So we've got to address the digital debt challenge, and I think we've to also address the meeting protocol challenge as well, and reinvent and reimagine what we mean by meetings. I always remember, even this goes way back before any digital stuff, but there was issue of meetings, and it is a long-standing issue. And one client of ours just said, no, we've just recast our what we mean by meetings. First of all, we stand up, we don't sit down, and as well as dealing with whatever the purpose of the meeting is, we say what thing we've learned the last week in terms of maybe a mistake we made, and it's to generate this idea of openness around mistakes and near misses, etc. And name one thing where you need help, one thing where you could do with the help of somebody else, and that became a fixed items of the agenda. But it was all about just rethinking. That's not necessarily the perfect model for everybody, but the point about it was that they addressed that meeting issue, and they said let's take this together as a team and a group and reimagine what we mean by a meeting, why we need a meeting, and so on. So I think a lot of that discussion is going on too, which is good. And the other point you make, I think, is the AI. And I know you've had great discussions on the threat of AI, and we don't need to overplay that. And it's very, very real. But AI being your friend or poised, I think it says in the report, to lift the weight of work. I think that was a nice way of putting it, and I agree with you. Anything that it can do to maybe lift the weight of work and allow you and others to do that more creative side. Yeah, bring it on. Yeah,
I should definitely start consider doing my podcast while I'm standing. There is plenty of evidence that standing does improve the quality of conversation and bring in a sense of urgency.
You're tuned in to the HR Bandit podcast, your one-way ticket to the latest and craziest in the world of work. In partnership with Timber Media, Podcaster for India Inc. is sponsored by Adrenaline E-Systems Limited.
I'm going to move into our second topic of the day, and it is very related because the Trends report does make a mention of this. Now, the past 12 months and more, we've seen much outrage around work and work practices. We've come across quiet quitting, the angst and the employee letters and walkouts that have happened in concern to just returning to office, the layoffs. And yet, a recent survey showed that employees, at least in the US, are more engaged at work than ever. In the US, it hit a 36-year high. 36, that's a huge number. Like, that's what, over 3 decades? This is the highest. So the two things happening at play. Work definitely has a bad rap in the market. And then it does seem like people are more engaged because work is definitely now more flexible than it was. There is more empathy, kindness, inclusion at the workplace. There's a recognition that individuals have a life outside of work and a whole bunch of things. So, Kevin, what's happening here? Does work need to fire its current PR rep and then get a new one in, or is there something else happening?
Yeah, there's so much. And again, it's so varied, isn't it? Between sectors, different company sizes are different. So you hear great stories from the one sector. You'll hear a great story and you'll hear a terrible story. Leadership and leadership comes into this too in a big way in creating the context and the environment here. And that came up through the report too. But you ask about the bigger issue or the deeper issue, what's underpinning, because so much noise and so much commentary and research and surveys coming out all the time. I just wonder, if you agree, but I get a sense that our relationship with work is going through a fundamental change. I think, obviously COVID, people talk about the time that it gave them a bit of time to reflect, on where they were going in terms of their work and their work futures. We heard issues from the hospitality industry, for instance, in terms of hard to get people back into the sector because people had thought about and changed their path and maybe gone into training or a different field, etc. Because there's so much paradox in what you've said, so much contradiction. I just can't help thinking there's a sort of this state of flux again, coming back to it, and ultimately underpinned by an importance that people put to their work, that they're also trying to say, well, where does work fit with the rest of my life? So number one is, what kind of work do I want? Where do I want to work? And the field, etc. That's one question. And then how does that then fit into the rest of my life as well is a second but related question. I think we're going through a little bit of a transition in that, a lot of people. And there's the debate going on, is it 2 days in the office or 3 days in the office? And I've written for a long time that what people are craving is just a better work and working life. Make my work better and make it matter, and so stripping back to some fundamentals around that, and leadership being open and honest about, okay, let's talk about that, and in a context of our business and what we need. And I just wonder, with that expectations definitely have risen in terms of people's expectations from work. It's a critical part of our lives. And I think we're all on a bit of a journey, and how we respond to one survey one day might be different to how we respond maybe a week later, because we've been triggered by, maybe this is part of my bigger question, but I do feel it does come back to this question about, people really wanting to find out or to work through, how do they make their work better and how do they make it matter, in terms of their, the meaning they get from it and how it fits into their broader lives. I think that's the bigger thing going on. And I think there's because of our experience over the last 3, 4, 5 years, I don't think it's a surprise, that people are a bit unsettled by that question and where they are in it. What do you think?
I definitely agree that the employer-employee relationship is going
Mm.
through a transition.
Mm.
But I'm also, I couldn't help but think as you were speaking, just the global diversity of how this approach is. It is like, I think part of it is a very privileged point of view. Like the survey
Mhm.
is US only, and then
Mhm.
the folks who are clamoring for return to office and what it doesn't mean is probably just the loudest folks in the room. Like there are parts of the world where just having
Yes.
a job is a luxury, and who cares what kind of jobs, because
Yes.
it helps
Yes.
pay the bills. For other parts, it is still a very authoritative rule where you're just like, yes, that's how work is. I'm serving the employer. And then there are these certain geographies which have evolved to a stage where they're now willing to say, yes, now work needs to mean more than just paying my bills. And I don't think we've discussed this enough on the pod or even outside, right? Like when organizations say that we're becoming increasingly global, but they still try and find like this one thing that works across all of these geographies, the singular culture that exists. And all of that was amazing when we started. But we're now starting to find cracks. Like what works very well in Ireland is not going to work in France, is not then going
Yep.
to work in India or China.
And within teams of the same
Yeah.
organization as well. Yeah.
And like we talk about diversity globally, but we also like exactly like within the organization, no certain city or a metro city in a certain location is made up of employees from only one place or one kind. So I do think like we're in a stage where the loudest people are winning or are getting talked about. But coming back to your point, like it's an opportunity to define our culture, and as we're defining it, be more intentional of the many intersectionalities that exist, and which is
Oh, yeah.
where this paradox and dichotomy is probably arising from.
Yeah. Oh no. I mean, you've touched on so many good points there, and as you know, we said at the top of the program about some of my interest in the wider context for work as well, not just in sort of modern workplace environments, but
Yeah.
where work is going generally, and that's been an area of concern for some time. Is this idea about don't leave anybody behind, embrace, and in terms of this exponential evolution of work that's been going on. And on one end you've got a bunch of people who are suffering on burnout trying to keep up with it, and on the other hand, at the other end of the spectrum, you've got people saying, well, I'd like even just the basics of that, please. And I'm concerned now about AI and things like that taking some of the basic jobs, because it might sound like a basic job to you, but actually for me that's really, really important. So this idea about making work better and making work matter is something that's a leveler, I think, because everybody has their own reference point as to what those two things mean, and I think they are universal. And I one of the things that makes me a little bit hopeful at the moment on that whole agenda, and I put a whole chapter of this in my book Thrive, was around I suppose the direction of travel that things like ESG is taking. And even investment, I think you've got to ultimately follow the money in some of these situations, particularly in the Western world, where, how do we get the investors on board on this and the funders of organizations in terms of, people's ESG commitments. And when I'm specifically getting at the S in the ESG in terms of, future proofing, society, for the future in terms of skills, access to employment, fair wage, all of these issues, I think, are, I hope, Ankita, on the table now, maybe more than they were even 5-10 years ago. I think the pandemic maybe has even helped to accelerate these further. So I hope that those voices, the people representing that agenda, are also getting louder, maybe, as well as those that you say at the other end of the spectrum who are dealing with very privileged complaints, if you like. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm no financial advisor, but if you're investing in stocks, maybe instead of the big tech and the Teslas and other things, consider investing in ESG organizations that are actually pushing that. It's like a lot of investors are saying that's the place to be. But because we've touched this place of hope and optimism, I'm going to take us to our last and final topic for the day. Now, we talked about this last year during Pride Month, and we're going to talk about this again. I've come across so many conversations with people asking how to be a better ally. And if it is as simple as just being a good listener with an open mind. Now, Kevin, before I come to you with asking for pointers and what you're thinking, I'm going to reference very quickly a 2022 HBR article that I recently reread and some of the things that stood out for me. So, per the article, the authors define allyship saying, we view allyship as a strategic mechanism used by individuals to become collaborators, accomplices, and co conspirators who fight injustice and promote equity in the workplace through supportive personal relationships and public acts of sponsorship and advocacy. Now, there's a lot in the article, Bandits. I recommend that you read it. But there are three things that resonated with me. So I'm going to go quickly over the three and why, and then Kevin will move to you. But the first thing it said, own your privilege, right? And I think a lot of people are so busy focusing on what they don't have that they're failing to recognize their privilege, right? I could always say, oh, I'm a woman living in a man's world, or I'm an immigrant living in a white person's world. Someone might say, I don't have enough money to, put 3 meals a day. But we still have privileges that we should keep checking. And just because our struggles are real doesn't mean that the other person's isn't, right? And we would think that this is natural, but just the amount of conversations where people have had saying, I am in a difficult situation, I need to focus on myself before, I go around trying to be a great ally to everyone else. Something that stood out for me even stronger is the see something, say something. And this is because of a recent incident that I had to quote, right? And I want to say that I don't do this, but I am embarrassed to say that I am victim of, seeing something and then not saying anything about it. One of my friends was talking about an incident where it was a public event and was being thanked to, run the show and everything else. And then the organizer went over to my friend and stroked her hair, like literally put palm of his hand on top of her head, took it down her hair. And she was just like in shock and didn't say a thing. And obviously there were many people in the public, and as far as she knows, no one said a thing either. So, and this doesn't baffle me because I see it happen all the time. It is sad, it's upsetting, but it is everywhere. So I like the see something, say something is going to be really hard, but something I want to start doing. And I want to go to my third thing. But before that, Kevin, I'll let you come in and ask you, what are you doing to be a better ally? What should we be taking away from this entire conversation on allyship?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I appreciate you bringing it up actually as allyship, and we're not just talking about DEI, and so much things. There's been Black Lives Matter, there's Me Too, there's so much identity, disability. There's just there's so much going on in this space. What I like about the way you're bringing up allyship, which I don't think is necessarily well known actually, and I think it needs more coverage, is the idea that you said at the individual level. So we're not talking about some corporate kind of policy and some new initiative and that kind of thing, or this week or this day or whatever it is, which are all useful triggers to remind people. But it's around social justice. It's about the individual's role and responsibility, and I think that's a really helpful context. And you get those three very interesting pointers that you use. I love that one. See something, say something. But for me, well, because there's so much here and there's so much difference to be acknowledged and listened to and learned from, I go back to something John Hume actually said. John Hume, Northern Irish politician, member of European Parliament, civil rights leader, Nobel Prize winner. He a long CV. But John Hume, he talked about, conflict and difference. I know we're not necessarily talking conflict here, but he talked about conflict being about difference, whether that difference is race, religion, or nationality. And he talked about difference, not being a threat or something to be afraid of, but it's completely natural. It's difference should be expected, and it's natural. It's the essence of humanity, he said. And therefore, it's an accident of birth and should therefore never be the source of hatred or conflict, or indeed, discrimination or exclusion. And he sort of brought it back to basics, Ankita. And as he said, really talking about the answer to difference is respect, just respect. And that idea, when you bring it into the workplace, it reminds me of that sort of concept originally from therapy and coaching and so on. But I think we should bring it into everyday relationships, which is this idea of, unconditional positive regard. So if you have something like that sense of unconditional positive regard and equal respect for everybody, that you're in a good starting place, then your mind is in a good place to have a good conversation, to see something and to say something more quicker, because it's immediately obvious to you as unfair or irregular. So I kind of like that idea about trying to not overthink these things, but is to strip it back to sort of basic human behavior, in terms of respect or unconditional positive regard. And that I hope will provide a platform or a basis to be able to accommodate difference, to listen openly and so on, like you say.
Yeah. Listening is definitely step one, and listening without judgment and positive intent is just, it's hard. We don't give it enough credit, but yeah.
And I wonder, do we need to give ourselves a break here a little bit I love that point you make, assume positive intent, because I do know people who are, say, struggling. They're trying to do the right thing. They're trying to be open. But back to our earlier conversation, there is so much going on, and there's so much busyness and stuff. They will overlook things, unconscious bias and so on, is absolutely there. I was talking to, a colleague who was managing a team of about 15 people all online, and, got caught, in the middle of the flow of the meeting and reminded by one person to say, look, sorry, but you didn't, address me by the right pronoun. And the person says, look, I'm sorry, I wasn't aware, I apologize, and moved on. But the thing was, they moved on. And neither party, and so I don't want to say side, but neither party in that exchange, took it any further. They just assumed positive intent, and they just gently corrected each other, or gently acknowledged it, and moved on, and learned from it. And I think that sort of positive intent on all sides is important too, because people are trying. Most people are. And then when that positive intent is not applied, that's a problem. And that needs to be called out, obviously. But I think quite a lot of people are trying to get this right, but probably will falter and fail along the way. And maybe we should expect that too.
Absolutely. But on that note, I'm going to try and lift our spirits. And I'm going to get us out of here. But before I go, very quickly, Kevin, not related to work at all, tell us, what is one thing you would like personally to achieve before the year is out?
Oh, well, I'm going to go. It has to go to the natural health area too. I know I've got one of these health things coming up, and it's like preparing for an exam. I'm being the best boy in terms of my health and well-being at the moment, even though I'm going to get the same kind of the same report probably from them, which is I need to do better. But I do have. I do think I'm probably at an age too where I've got to say, look, it's time to stop making excuses now. Let's try and be fitter, be faster, eat less, exercise more, all of that. So I'm going to give myself a couple of KPIs on that one. I don't think just, general progress is enough on that particular one. I'm going to really give that a shot. So you can come back to me in the
end of the year. Absolutely.
year, and I would gladly be accountable to you for that one.
Everyone has those goals, Kevin. Age has nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
Ask anyone of any age. They'll come up with KPIs in that space. But,
I just consider that whole period, though, the past is the past, the failings are the failings.
Exactly.
It's like the past is your R&D phase, right? And the future now is the real deal. So let's see where we get to at the end of the year.
It's the real deal. And bandits, if you were waiting to figure out what percentage of goals I have gotten at, I want to say about 30%. It's been a good year. And then if you share this podcast with whoever's sitting next to you, it's going to make my year even better. On that note, Kevin, thank you so much for spending time with us here today.
Thank
you.
On
behalf,
pleasure.
Yes, my pleasure's all mine. On behalf of NHRDN and Kevin, this is Ankita, and we are out.
You're tuned in to the HR Bandit podcast, your one-way ticket to the latest and craziest in the world of work. In partnership with Timber Media, podcaster for India Inc., is sponsored by Adrenaline E-Systems Limited.